The chair. There.
Okay, you're live. Thanks.
Welcome, everybody, to House General and Housing Committee. And today is Wednesday, May 21. And we are going to hear this morning two groups of testimony. And the first is we have a bill on our wall, H 445, which is an act related to creating the Land Access and Opportunity Revolving Fund. And although, it might not make it out this year, it's an important issue. And so the director and the director of program development for the LAOB have graciously volunteered their time to come and talk to us. And that's what we're going to do now. You guys have been here before, you know the committee. So why don't you introduce yourself for the record and take it away? And you're testifying jointly, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ronela Mata Figueroa. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement for the Land Access and Opportunity Board.
And good morning. I am Jean Hamilton. I'm the Director of Program Development for the LAOB, and we function as a co-directorship.
Yes. Thank you so much for making time to have a dialogue with us about 445. We appreciate you all, and we appreciate all the hard work you've done this session. As we start, we want to make sure that you all see this together as a working draft of a bill. We're inviting you to roll up your sleeves with us. Figuratively and literally, there's folks outside working on building, and there's going to be many opportunities like that in the future. Because right now we need all hands on deck, and we need everyone believing in their own power to contribute to our housing and land solution. We always begin with our touchstones, which I'm going to read out loud as we do every time we give testimony. We invite all of us together to listen generously and to speak our truth from our heart and mind. We make the way that we work together an example of what is possible, and we trust that we each hold a piece of the puzzle and that we need each other's pieces to understand the whole picture. So what is H 445? This bill creates a short-term tax for incomes over $500,000 to create a revolving loan fund administered by the Land Access and Opportunity Board. Land Access and Opportunity Revolving Loan Fund is going to be used for the purpose of supporting community-based affordable housing. Today, we're going to look at the bill's proposed language in the context of the work that we are already doing and what is upcoming for us. What we've been working on is engagement, assessment, and planning activities with many key partners. The Department of Housing and Conservation, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, I already mentioned the Conservation Board, the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont, the Food Security Roadmap Coalition, the Land Access Coalition, and many other grassroots and community leaders. Looking out into this upcoming year, we're spearheading a number of initiatives that tee up projects that are ready for funding and groundbreaking. We're working with the HCD on the Emerging Developers Technical Assistance Program. We're working on a project for land access and food lands collaborative visioning process because we're losing food lands at such a fast rate in our state. We're working with DDHI study report. We're also working with, we have a Shelter for All committee, and we're working with BHART doing a community engagement process to look at BHART and look at what it could look like for us to put shelter in municipalities. We're also working with the People Demands for Just Recovery and CROWS to build community resilience toolkits and to build community resilience hubs in every community in our state. We're also receiving lots of requests for support with cluster housing and agri-hoods. Our communities really, really would like to be working on this cluster housing. We're also actively seeking capital for these projects, which this bill speaks to.
Sorry, can I ask I can wait, but can I just ask a really quick question?
Mhm.
What is it? Agri-hood?
It is like a neighborhood that looks at doing farming and agriculture together with the community neighborhood. So it like builds in farming and collective farming into collective living.
And what is that called?
Agri-hood,
Very cool.
right? I think so too.
And is cluster housing directly related to agrihood, or are they separate concepts?
I think it could be an example of cluster housing as well, but the piece that we're really trying to highlight as something that we're not seeing considered as a part of affordable housing is how can folks be doing farming and living affordably in building these kinds of communities that really connect people to the land.
Yeah, sorry if I can just piggyback
Yeah,
on that
totally.
farming, and also how do we make sure that there is access to affordable housing and land tenureship in rural communities, so that we're avoiding this sort of pattern we're starting to see now of pushing and prioritizing affordable housing in villages and dense neighborhoods while sort of leaving rural communities to be the areas where you still need to be able to purchase 100 acres or 50 acres or 20 acres by yourself to be able to have housing. We don't think that is not what our communities are asking for. Many of our community members want to stay in rural communities, have access to land, and be able to afford it.
Can you describe what a community toolkit is?
Sure. So we noticed last couple of years when we had these emergency floods that there was like a need of different resources in the community. What happens when there isn't FEMA there? Or when our communities, as we know, can be hard to get to because of the rivers. So we need to make sure that these communities resource what they need to be resilient in case of an emergency and a flood. And I don't have all of the details because it's not my specialty. I would love to invite the leaders that are putting this toolkit together at some point and let them know that you all want to hear about this because it's such sensational work that's like building across grassroots groups that is like working together to get like a checklist of what is most essential in the event of an emergency. What should communities be equipped with to be able to, work well and take care of their communities in a crisis.
Sorry, can I say one? There is a theme in community resilience toolkits that play throughout this whole bill and LAOB's work, which is the communities that LAOB serves has a embodied understanding that it is likely no one is coming to save us. Many of the communities we serve have been on their own, suffering and struggling for many generations and not being served adequately by the shared public resources. Within the current federal administration, we have a heightened sense of there's not really the resources there, and it's unlikely that someone's going to come save us, very literally with FEMA. FEMA may not be there for us if and when we flood this summer. And what we've seen on the ground during these floods, and our partners at the People's Demands and CROWS and NECO have seen, is that when the floods happen, the first responders are the citizens. It's volunteers who step up and muck and gut the houses, and only years later do they get, if ever, get compensated for any of that. And so what you'll see in this bill, what you'll see in the People's Demands and the resilience toolkits is how do we really acknowledge that people and citizens and Vermonters are our front line, and we can do so much more to unlock the power of individual people working together through some strategic tools like a toolkit, like a resource guide of, okay, when a flood happens, what do we need? How do you set up a volunteer network? What are the basic tools you need? A generator, 10 shovels. And you'll see that same kind of theme reflected here. This bill is exciting to us because it really empowers people to step up in a sense of self-agency, upskilling, and self sort of manifestation into secure housing and land.
Elizabeth?
I
I promise you, I'm not gonna go off on a rant, but I've been saying for the last number of years that community is what Vermont has. It is our greatest resource. And I really love the fact that, well, I mean, the LAOB is what that's all fostering that. But I love that you have really dug deep into that idea, what we do have. And understanding the not just the magic and creativity that are in there, but the actual, solid resources that we have in our own people power. And thank you for that. It jives with what's inside of me. Thank you.
We think it's so important right now that we keep building the trust between our community members and the systems. And that we're building as much capacity as we can to grow civic engagement, to make sure that people who are most impacted by our programs and our policies are helping shape what these programs and policies look like, because we know for a fact that when people are shaping these programs and policies, they are more effective, that people go out and vote, that people participate in our civic processes because they trust that their voice will have an impact.
So I love that you are spreading civil engagement or civic engagement or, citizen engagement rather than stressing the people who are already engaged. Like encouraging them to go out and spread it further is a lot more effective than adding more things to people who are already putting forward goodwill.
This is one of the things that we were going to talk about, and I can't even remember in what order anymore. So we're just going to go with the flow. But one of the things that, I don't need to apologize, but one of the things that we've been noticing is that folks are at lack of capacity in all areas. So folks that have been showing up for the last 2 years to these flood impacted communities, we know is neighbor to neighbor. We know that folks are still living in mold infestations. We know that the capacity and the limitations are there. And we know also that it's not an easy thing for us to come here and say, wow, we'd like to increase taxes 1.5% on those who make $500,000 or more. Like, we know that this is not a popular perspective. And we're also trying to make up, and we keep hearing from the leaders of the systems, has it been 30 years of little investment in housing until the pandemic money came in? Or was it 60 years of little investment in housing? Depending on who you ask, you get different timelines of how little investment there's been into the housing and the affordable housing system for the last 30 and 60 years. And right now we're proposing that this little tax starts to make up for that disinvestment and then build some resources, some of it in a revolving loan fund. So this money will not go away. And it'll be like a recurring investment that will get paid back, and then some of it into grants. And the details of that is something that we're going to work on this summer. And that we're hoping that we can invite you all into a dialogue with us about what it is that will shape up good policy for next year, so we can hit the ground running next year and have all the voices heard.
Perhaps it might be good for you to get into a little bit into the detail of what you think the 1.5% would raise, what the amount of the fund you're looking for, how you would disperse things from it.
So this bill proposes a potential source of funds by adding a time-limited short term for 5 years, 1.5 income tax surcharge on very high earners. Of course, any tax policy creates needs, deep research and consideration, but as a starting place, we estimate this surcharge would create about 30 million in revenue every year. There is a precedent for this type of short-term taxation in the Snelling surcharge, in which Republican Governor Richard Snelling compromised with Democratic lawmakers to address a budget deficit by enacting a temporary income tax. There's good reason to consider a surcharge on the highest earners when so many Vermonters are currently unable to meet their basic needs budgets. And we know that access to homeownership and the other tools laid out in this bill would increase households' ability to meet their basic needs. The next section in the bill will define the grants and loans.
Sorry, I'm gonna go back and forth between the bill. We're mostly looking at the bill so you can see where the language is, but there are a couple of places where it's helpful to just pull out some slides. So if I'm causing seasickness for you, please let me know, but I'm gonna just scroll down to.
Is there something you want to add here? Because I feel like no, you good. You want me to continue?
Yeah, I think we're now gonna go into the section that talks about the actual loans and grant making.
What page is
Sorry,
that?
let me find out. Okay, here we go. It is page 5. And please look to lines starting with 12. Those are the activities the grants and loans that are defined in this.
It's
bill.
the thought that you would, I'm sorry to be pressing you on the financials, but we have others scheduled in 2 minutes.
I know.
Is the idea that you'd wait until the fund accumulated more, or you'd start giving grants right away?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we can tell you and what we would like to tell you if we have time today is that we are in the process of working really closely with a number of initiatives around the state that will be teeing up projects that are ready for investment, that are ready for groundbreaking within this next year and certainly over the next 5 years. We have not actually defined how we would use these funds because this is a proposed bill that's still sitting on the wall. So we'd really like to work with you all over the summer. But at like a just first blush answer, we believe that we will have projects that are ready for funding by the time this first year of these funds accumulate. And we would like to be moving money out into the community ASAP to get projects.
Did you discuss internally, or have you had external discussions? 'Cause I know you've been through the budget process several times with appropriations, other possible sources of funds besides a surcharge?
Yes, one proposed revenue stream that we're thinking about for this kind of capital is an portion of the cannabis excise tax money. So CCB put forward a report this year that recommended 25% of cannabis excise tax be put into community reinvestment activities through LEOB. This is the 3rd year that CCB has recommended a portion of excise tax be invested into community reinvestment. It is consistent with what other states are doing with their cannabis revenues. And LAOB is absolutely positioned and ready to make good on those funds and put them into our communities so that our communities can develop these kinds of housing initiatives.
And the final budget, the budget as came out of conference, that fund, all that money just went into the general fund?
I'm sorry, what came out of the CCB, or sorry, the cannabis excise, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the cannabis excise didn't make it, right? I mean, it was all the funds from the cannabis excise just were dumped into the general fund.
I think there is a bill right now in finance and Senate finance that would look to keep basically the excise tax as it is now, which is held in a fund while the excise accumulates over a year. And then similarly to how it works now, CCB would take their regulation dollars, prevention would take 30%. The bill that we're talking about right now would actually allocate 500,000 to Cannabis Business Development Fund and 500,000 to LAOB, and then the remainder would go to general fund.
So, yeah, okay, there is a final budget that's done, that's out of here.
Yes.
And in that final budget for the 26 year, there was nothing in it for LAOB, right?
No, yes, we do. We have $1.6 million in base funding.
Yeah, but not out of it. Was it anything out of the cannabis?
No,
Mm-mm.
thank you. No.
No.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
that's right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? You will be part of the following testimony as well. Is there anything else as to this bill you want to tell us?
We have so many things we'd like to tell you about this bill. Can we have a bit more time, or would
Sure,
you
a
like?
couple
we
more
could-
minutes, yeah.
Okay, we can also write it up and just.
No, I think,
I'm trying to think, if I had 30 seconds.
sure, well, I think a couple of minutes is
Yeah,
fine.
you definitely do. I'm actually very intrigued by a lot of this. So if you wouldn't mind writing that, I would also really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
To like be able to just.
Yeah, and that way you can be more
But
complete.
yes, please still take minutes, but I
Yeah.
would like.
Yeah, I think with 30 seconds and knowing that this is the end of session, what I really would love is to engage everyone in a dialogue over the summer. Because I believe that we are, all of our constituents are suffering because of housing needs. And there is a big opportunity here to put resources into the hands of all of our community members and build more housing.
Thank you. And what I would say, which we'll write up in our memo to you all, is that, first of all, thank you to Rep. Chena and also the co-sponsors on this bill. It
Mhm.
really aligns very closely with where we are in our process. We are actively working on the ground with many, many partners around the state, including our housing and land institutions and also community organizers and leaders, to build these plans that do get projects ready for pilot projects ready for funding. So we are, one example of that is the Emerging Developers Technical Assistance Program. We started working on this with VHFA about a year ago, and as of right now, we are sort of finalizing the plan to merge this with DHCD's Homes for All program in a really robust and amazing technical assistance program to empower everyday Vermonters to figure out how to build housing in their communities. This is really cool. It's very robust, and no amount of technical assistance will solve for the fact that if you don't have access to capital, you cannot build anything. So one missing piece from this technical assistance program is the kind of capital that this bill would generate through this revenue. And so that's one example. We also are working very closely with Developmental Disabilities Council and the Developmental Disabilities Housing Initiative and VHCB to work on the study report, which I think you all explored, which is how do we actually get to the 650 homes that our developmental disability community need to have sustained secure housing. This is the kind of research we're doing now that will generate pilot projects that are capital ready and shovel ready in the years that this bill would be generating capital to fix that system. So again, we'll go into all the details of what that looks like relative to this bill, but we really do want to keep working with you on how do we get this kind of language passed? How do we get this kind of revenue generated? And generally, how do we work together to empower everyday Vermonters on the ground to, to step up and step in to functioning civic structures where they feel empowered and trustworthy and trusting of the system.
Yes.
Question. So you brought up former Governor Snelling. Remind me, that portion of the taxation, that was only for a few years. Is this perpetual?
5 years.
5 years.
Okay. Thank
Mhm.
you. Sorry if you said that and I completely missed it.
Okay,
Great. Thank you so much.
thank you.
And you're not going away, right? Yeah.
We're good.
And Maura, you want to sit down? Um,
I see Rep. Chena raised his hand. I don't know if he could have a chance to. I'll stop sharing, but I just saw it.
Oh, I wanted to share like 3 sentences, just that last year when JFO projected what a 3% surcharge on income earners over $500,000 would yield, the figure I believe was 75.4 million a year. So I don't know if that's the same, and I don't know if dividing that in half is accurate, but if dividing it in half was accurate for a 1.5% surcharge, that could be 37 point something million a year. So I think, the idea though is that if we could raise between 100 and 150 million for 5 years and reinvest it in these programs, it could have a huge impact for generations to come. So I just wanted to share the numbers to give you an idea of what a short-term surcharge might yield. But that's something that Ways and Means would have to look at since that's their jurisdiction. Thanks for letting me share that.
Thank you. All right, so now we're taking testimony on Act 181, Section 37, which called for a study report. which I think this committee has seen, but we are going to have testimony on it, starting with Mark. Oh. Or I know that you know everybody here better than you probably want to.
No, I always want to know more. We're gonna go around and say what the high school superlatives you won were in the yearbook. My name is Maura Collins. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. VHFA was one of several partners that participate in a summer study committee last year, and we want to tell you about it. I'm here. The summer study committee was actually, it was the Department of Housing and Community Development. So Commissioner Alex Farrell wanted to be here. It was their organization that was tasked with organizing this study. And it was Chris Cochran within DHCD's shop who did the heavy lifting of corralling the cats for us to have these conversations. The reason the legislature last year asked for a study was because previous to when we started waiving Act 250 and having exemptions to Act 250, there used to be one way that you could be exempt from Act 250. And that was if you were a PHP, which in this context stands for Priority Housing Project. And a priority housing project, if you wanted to get around Act 250, anyone could do it, any kind of developer. All they had to do was that 20% of the homes they were creating had to be affordable at certain price points and income levels. And for homeownership, it was just on the first sale. For rental, the affordability lasted for 15 years. And as typical, these are normal thresholds for rental housing. It had to be affordable under 80% of median. For homeownership, it had to be affordable under 120% of median. Those are standard affordability definitions. And PHPs were used by developers for years. I testified a few weeks ago on an unrelated topic, and I was saying that if you looked at those, the way it was defined and what got approved, a lot of that housing, even though any developer could have had 20% of units as affordable, it didn't say you had to have government money to do it. It didn't say you had to be a nonprofit. It didn't say you had to house the homeless or any of that. You just had to have 20% under these price points. But what we found in practice was that a lot of the projects that got this PHP exemption were the kind of government-supported affordable housing that you think of when you talk about projects that have been served by VHCB or come through the tax credit program or something like that. So then the state decided to start allowing for exemptions from Act 250 for other reasons, not just because some were affordable, but because you were in a downtown area and there was, a temporary exemption to get us through until we have the mapping. And then we get into, well, once the tier 1A, 1B mapping gets done, there may be other exemptions. So where did this leave affordable housing? It left it where now there wasn't the same kind of incentive for developers to think about building affordable housing. And I often will talk about the thousands, tens of thousands of homes we need in the next several years. And a bunch of those need to be affordable, and a bunch of them don't necessarily have to be. I think it would break the bank if all of them were affordable. We need to have a robust housing market where there's churn, there's movement, there's options for everyone, whether they want to be a homeowner or a renter, whether they want to live, in each of your districts or a different district. And so what we wanted, though, was to protect the idea that there should be some incentive to build affordable housing, because what do we know about affordable housing? The market doesn't do it on its own. We need incentives, we need funding, we need to push and pull the market to have affordable housing.
Let me interrupt you. I just want to make sure I understood something you just said. What you were saying, which is kind of a new idea to me, what you were saying is the incentive to do PHPs, the Act 250 exemption incentive was kind of diluted somewhat by the addition in Act 181 of a bunch of other exemptions.
Yeah.
So that it just wasn't as attractive as it was.
Right.
Okay, got
I
it.
can get an Act 250 exemption. I know most of Vermont right now, a lot of Vermont. So why would I do affordable housing?
Right. Okay,
So this study was to look at what else can we do to support affordable housing? And so what you're going to hear from the other speakers, I had the easy job, just tee it up. You're going to hear about the process we went through to do the study, how we got the feedback. It wasn't just the 2, 4, 5, 6 of us or something and our ideas. It was a lot of engagement. And then there are a list of recommendations, and the testimony to you all is so that you will take lots of notes and don't forget what you're going to hear. The teacher in me wants to wag my finger at you and say, remember this for next year, because we'd love to tee up what you're thinking about and what these recommendations are, and see if over the summer and fall we can have some special magic so that we all come in January singing Kumbaya, holding hands, knowing exactly how we're going to make sure there's enough affordable housing in the state. If you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
thank you. With that, teacher, is there any question of this witness before she gets off the?
I'm not leaving the room.
I am home.
Okay,
I tried to.
They're not holding hands, I'm told, but metaphorically.
I do want to know what your high school superlative was.
You know, I was the editor of the high school paper, and so I am sure if I had one, it would have been something about dogged journalism and reporting. But I wasn't that remarkable in high school to have earned, I went to a big high school. I didn't earn a superlative. But if you want to give me one now, I'll take a paper plate. I heard that.
I'll work on it.
Thank you.
Okay, people, not you.
absolutely.
Getting set up for the record, I'm Polly Major. I'm the policy director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and we are named as members of this study committee. And I have with me today Annie Decker, who's our associate director of resource development and resiliency. I always have to take a breath before your title. And Annie and I are going to walk you through the report briefly, look at the stakeholder engagement process, what we've heard from the stakeholders. And then I'll run through the recommendations, putting them in context of the policy conversations that have been happening in this.
Why don't we, since Annie is due, why don't we briefly introduce ourselves?
Me? Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Gail Pezzo, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
Debbie Dolgan, I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Hi, Tom Charlton, Athens, Chester, Grafton, and Lincoln. Joe Parsons, I represent the absolutely beautiful towns of Newbury, Thompson, and Groton.
Good morning, Ashley Bartley, Fairfax in Georgia.
And I'm Mark Mahali, and I represent the towns of Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield, that as of this moment are dry.
Wonderful. It's great to meet you all. And I'm Annie Decker. And just briefly about me, I've been with VHCB since July of 2024. Previously, I worked for a decade in municipal government. I worked for the town of Waitsfield, both as their planning administrator. So I'm a certified planner. I have a background in planning. And then I was the town administrator for the town of Waitsfield for the last 3 years before I started working at VHCB. So really glad to be here today. Wonderful to meet you all. And I will dig into just briefly the legislative charge here that kind of kicked off this effort. So the Act 181 study group was tasked with identifying regulatory policies that support affordable and mixed income housing, including the role of inclusionary zoning. We were also charged with recommending legislative, regulatory, and administrative changes to expand incentives within designated growth areas. So to do this, we engaged with stakeholders statewide, and we grounded our work in what they told us was needed to support affordable housing development. So I will give an overview again on kind of the methodology and process that we undertook to develop this report. So the study group was comprised of staff from DHCD, VHFA, LAOB, and VHCB. We held 6 formal meetings between June and December of 2024, but we divided up responsibilities for research, outreach, and report drafting within that group. There was a lot of meeting in addition to those kind of 6 formal meetings. The group spent a lot of time organizing and hearing from expert stakeholder focus groups and then developing a public survey. We wanted to make sure we provided as much opportunity for engagement and input from both stakeholders and the public. And the feedback that we received from those efforts really shaped the recommendations that we will present. So we started with these expert focus groups. We reached out to a number of stakeholders, including those that were specifically identified in the guiding legislation. We spoke directly to housing developers, municipal leaders, housing advocates, among many others. And we developed a list of standard questions that we kind of asked each of those groups, some in one-on-one interviews, some in larger group settings. And we ask them questions that would help us better understand from their perspective what might help incentivize affordable housing production, to both frame potential recommendations, but also to inform the public survey that we put together after this. So I'd like to share some key findings that we heard from those expert focus groups. The first was a strong message that subsidy is critical for the development of affordable housing. And regulatory changes alone aren't enough to address this continued need. We also heard that the priority housing project designation has historically worked to develop affordable housing, and that it would be most helpful to allow that process to evolve in some way and not be discarded wholly. So this comes back to like, how do we actually incentivize affordable housing? We also heard that inclusionary zoning can help produce affordable housing, but may be more effective in certain areas like higher density areas, and also needs accompanying financial support to be effective. And we heard that the rising cost and limited supply of just the market in general are stressing the entire housing ecosystem. We also heard that affordable housing really must be central public interest as all policies are developed, so kind of keeping affordable housing at the core of a lot of these policies that we're looking at and talking about. We heard that local opposition and current permitting and administrative processes are creating significant barriers to affordable housing development. We also heard that towns vary widely in their capacity to plan for and support affordable housing. And finally, we heard a lot that land that is development ready with both infrastructure and aligned housing incentives is actually in very short supply. So again, these insights really helped us develop recommendations and also this public survey that I would like to speak on next. To broaden our reach, we issued a 9-question public survey. It was open for 31 days from December 10th, 2024 to January 10th, 2025. We shared the survey widely using all of our organizations and collective network of partners. We received 757 responses, which we were really thrilled by. Great, shocking, yes. Yes, pleasantly surprised. We saw strong participation from municipal officials, state government officials, as well as those who just identified as members of the general public. So a lot of people were really interested in this topic and providing their input. The results of the survey validated many of the concerns that we heard in our expert focus groups and overall demonstrated strong public support for a variety of targeted actions to address barriers to affordable housing development. So I'll share some key findings that we also heard from the survey. First, we did see overwhelming support for mixed income, affordable housing and housing development. We saw support for streamlined and more predictable permitting processes, and again, strong support for stable, dependable funding to support affordable housing. We also saw a need to kind of narrow the grounds for the appeal process that can impact affordable housing. We heard that again from our stakeholder groups and from the public. The need to invest in infrastructure to support affordable housing really emerged in the feedback from the survey. And applying Act 250 exemptions more strategically for larger projects was also kind of feedback that we heard from the survey. The survey questions and more details on the results are all linked as appendices in the report itself. So there's a wealth of information here. Again, 757 responses is significant. So if anyone's interested in digging into more of that detail, that's all available in the report. But this is kind of, again, the background on how we developed the recommendations, and I will kick over to Polly now to present the recommendations that came out of this group.
Sure, and would you mind pulling up the report? And I think I just want to have the text, the screen behind us, not with the expectation that you're going to read it,
Yes.
but to show you that Chris Cochran and his team did a really fabulous job taking input from over 700 people around the state and distilling it down into, I think, 7 recommendation areas and about 3 pages. So hats off to him.
Did this come out in like late January?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, you have it. And this is just.
I've read it a couple of times, actually.
That's great. We'll let Chris know. So I'm going to walk through the recommendations, but I also want to set your expectation that Jean and Ornella from the LAOB are going to come up after us and really lead a discussion on some of the some focus areas within the recommendations. So if I'm going quickly, it's because I want to save space for that.
Oh, absolutely.
So the first area of recommendations that we looked at was recommendations for how we can incentivize mixed income communities and housing within the Act 250 framework that was adapted and re-envisioned in Act 181. The first one here was adapt those priority housing project regulations to project-based infrastructure bonds. So this is the CHIP bill that you're working on right now. You're doing a ton of work on this first recommendation. Thank you for that. Looks like reading the report early in the session hopefully helped inform some of that. So a lot of work is happening there, but there are other recommendations too that came up from the stakeholder groups here. One, to remove the cap on units in the tier 1B areas. So these are the areas that have that sewer and water and some planning capacity, but aren't in that highest tier, tier 1A, to really allow full housing development there. And then also to make that tier 1B the default rather than a area that municipalities need to opt into. So right now in the current bill, it's opt in, and the recommendation here that we'd like to discuss more with you today and where is to make this opt out. Make it more of an automatic process for communities to qualify for tier 1B. That came up with stakeholders. The second area of recommendations is around funding incentives. You've heard a lot about this. So I think the emphasis here is just that this was something we were hearing as a top priority for the stakeholders that participated in this planning process. We heard from them that you can do everything in terms of easing the permitting process and making regulatory incentives, but without funding because of the cost of construction, we can't make these homes affordable.
Was there any discussion, or is there any discussion as to, well, what those stable funding sources might be?
Did that come up I'm looking to Annie because I was on maternity leave through these stakeholder conversations.
I mean, entirely, I mean, in the final report, is there any detail that looks at options for stable funding sources as opposed to just the current appropriations process?
There wasn't, I don't think there were specific identifications
No.
like you heard from LAOB earlier of identifying different tax sources. And the traditional one has been the property transfer tax that's invested through the HCB and affordable housing production.
Yeah, but nothing more specific beyond just.
But that's like a third of the amount that you spent, you're talking like what, 27 million or something like that in base, and over the last 4 or 5 years, you've spent another 60 to 100 million, right?
So a lot of the feedback we heard from from stakeholders was that need for that stable funding. So we've seen that increased funding over the last several years that has allowed an increase in housing production to help work towards those housing production goals. But without that stability in revenues moving forward, developers aren't able to identify as many projects, plan for as many projects, bring as many projects forward, and ultimately get as many homes built. So that's where they're really emphasizing both having funding available and having it be stable and predictable to allow the development process to move forward.
Yeah, we framed that funding question a few ways in the survey. And the one that emerged to the top of the list, again, not a specific policy proposal or option, but that predictable and stable was really the message that emerged.
Can I jump in just real quick, because we're hoping that after the presentation of the recommendations, we can do a little bit of discussion and sort of action planning with you all. Something that stood out to me, because this was one of the first legislative working groups I've ever worked on, is I would have thought like, oh, we're going to solve all these problems in the legislative working group. But of course, really, this is just a beginning. And what I am now learning about policymaking is that we need to figure out ways to stay coordinated and together as we action plan and take next steps on these kinds of reports. And so that was really a hope for how we framed up this testimony today, is that we would make this report come alive into the future of how we work together. And what you're bringing up is a perfect example of work we could do over the summer and fall to really get granular on what are different ideas we have to raise revenue that could be stable and secure over the next 5 years, like the previous bill we were just testifying on. That's just one example. Cannabis excise is another example. There's probably 10 more good examples that we could look on and work together on, which we hope to do with you all and us.
The legislation specifically asks us to focus on inclusionary zoning. And so what we heard from community members around inclusionary zoning was that there was a technical assistance need, both to help communities interested in IZ to draft those ordinances, and also technical assistance to help them with compliance, with knowing that a portion of these homes are indeed affordable over time. On a different side of the inclusionary zoning conversation, there was also a discussion around, for the larger developments, should we require them to be mixed income so that we are continuing to create those mixed income, not economically gated communities moving forward. Appeals is a piece of body of work that this committee's done a lot of through this session, and we've really heard the need for this from stakeholders. So thank you for all your work that you've done here. And I think this really aligns with the discussions that you have. How do we buffer affordable housing projects from appeals, expedite appeals, support the rapid remedies through Human Rights Commission, and also make sure, as we're reforming the appeals process, that we keep equity and access at the heart of the process, so that we are not limiting access to just appeals. Brownfields came up a lot. Again, no surprise to anyone here, and this is another thing that is in the housing bills looking to be studied over the next year. How do we, if we want to build in downtowns, how do we make sure that we're expediting the brownfields review process and working with DEC to do so? And finally, tax policy to incentivize affordable housing. And I think you've heard about land banking that came up here, but also the fourth recommendation here to consider residential tax rate impacts. Just want to flag the conversation that's in process around the education finance bill and looking at desegregating property classifications so that different tax rates can be applied to different properties. One of the ways this could impact affordable housing is if you have a higher tax rate for second homes than for primary dwellings, you create an incentive within the tax system to have homes as primary dwellings. And that's something that's now studied in the education finance bill, is what is the technical methodology for the tax department to understand what types of properties are being used in which ways and how would they apply different tax rates. So I just sped through those recommendations, and it is because I know LAOB is going to do a much more textured conversation with you around key areas there.
Yes.
Have you been given the opportunity to present any of this in the Environment Committee?
They have not asked. We would be happy to, should they ask. And yeah, a lot of this is their jurisdiction around the land use.
And so of course I ask that because the opt-out, rather than the opt-in was an amendment on Act 181 last year, and that was fought pretty hard. Again, appeals. I'm all about appeals, and the appeals language from our housing bill was just taken out in the Senate. So I just didn't know is this the only committee you've been
This is.
invited into? Okay.
Also along those lines, did you have a question? No, along those lines, I think, I mean, I just want to emphasize, that's one of the things we're struggling with, is that the divided jurisdictions here. The whole process question, the appeals, particularly appeals, was given over during the summer to the Land Access Opportunity Board report.
The LURB report, the
LURB report,
land use.
Not the LOs, my apologies. The LURB report. Land Use Review Board. Are you guys contending to participate, and how?
Yes, so I think Jean's going to touch on that.
Okay,
because she's
all right.
been part of these conversations
Okay,
as
great.
VHCB.
Great. Thank you.
More to come there.
Thank you.
So for the remainder of the time today, we'd like to invite the committee into a strategic planning with us. Where, how, and who can advance these recommendations so that we can see action on these in the next year? A lot of expert guidance went into this report, and many of us are actively exploring and pursuing some of these recommendations. And we are able to get more accomplished when we work together in coordinated ways. And as we say in the AOB, that we all hold a piece of the puzzle. I know you heard us say that earlier today. That's the invitation. How can the LAOB, VHCB, VHFA, VHCB, this committee, and all of the partners we interact with and work with over the summer, fall, and next session to understand, legislate, and roll out these actions? For today's discussion, we pulled out these recommendations because based on the work we're doing in the field, these are the actions that currently feel most alive, promising, and impactful. Clarifying that we're not saying these are the top priorities, as we did not work with stakeholders to prioritize these recommendations. These recommendations have momentum right now based on the work that we're doing in the field, and we recommend that we stay nimble and adapt at reading changing conditions and prioritizing emerging strategies. We're better able to enact emergent strategies when we're working together, which is why we want to spend the rest of our time together laying a path forward for how we can collectively work together over the coming months and next session. To help frame our discussion today, Jean is going to take us through some prompts, and I'm going to take some notes.
Perfect. Yeah, and so forgive me, I'm new enough in this building that I don't know how often, I don't know where to put my body when I'm gonna sit here. I don't know if you guys get to get facilitated in a conversation, but this is a lot of what we do with the LAOB is we invite circles of people to come together, case study a problem, and lay out an action plan. And those action plans, what we find helpful in this process is to have some juicy kind of prompts that allow all of us to just get on the board, like where can we be taking action? Who should be taking that action? What are you working on that's related? How's that related to what you're working on? And that when we have this tactical information, we can actually strategically pull together to get stuff done. So that's what we're hoping to do with this report, because we actually take a lot of pride in this report, and it is so sad when we put effort into writing reports and then it goes to die on the legislative website. This report has a lot of recommendations that, as you heard our colleagues say, like we're holding in the field with us, we're taking them forward, and we would like to work with this committee over the summer and fall to queue up what you want to do, the work you want to do next session, so that we're hitting January with some stuff that's ready to go. That's our goal for the discussion today. Did you want to jump in?
Oh, I just wanted to say, related to what you said before, that often when we're in rooms, people are kind of fighting each other against a problem. So like, this is a strategy where we put like a situation at the center of a table and we're all working together to fix the problem, not working and fighting each other about what we believe are positions in it.
So hopefully you all can join us for this experiment. We really invite your just full honesty and candor here. But the prompts that we're going to look at are these. Which of these actions, and you're welcome to pull in other recommendations from the report. So again, we chose these out of each of the sections because these are the ones that are most alive for us in our work. We work together with Polly and Annie and Maura to sort of evaluate like which of these things seem most promising right now. That's why they're in front of you today. So we'd love to workshop these, but if there are other recommendations in the report you want to put on the table for consideration for action planning, please bring them in. One of the prompts we want to focus on in our action planning is which of these actions are interdependent and need to be sequenced or done together. So for example, we know subsidizing affordable housing is a precursor to many of these other things. There's not really a lot of benefit to expediting appeals or expediting permitting processes if we don't have projects that are funded and can actually be going forward for permits. So we know that we have to be creative and resourceful about finding ways to fund these subsidies, affordable housing subsidies, and those are connected potentially to, for example, these residential tax rate impacts or the other tax ideas that we talked about with the previous bill. The next question we want to put forward for discussion today is what initiatives, working groups, rulemaking, or other projects are currently underway that we can leverage and work within to advance these actions. So for example, you mentioned the Land Use Review Board. We're actively participating in a number of their study groups and working groups, including rulemaking around Tier 3, and most relevant to today, to the appeals process. And one of the ideas that first came to my attention through this report was an idea of, can we limit appeals sort of liability or exposure for projects that have undergone a certain amount of community planning on the front side. So, you know, an example of this might be the project in Putney with the affordable housing, that there was extensive community engagement. This was part of zoning. The community had already bought in. They prioritized the project through lots and lots of community engagement. And then one person had the power through multiple different appeals processes to slow that project down for 3 years. If we engage communities through zoning and through town planning and then through visioning and project visioning, and hundreds of community members already say yes, then can we limit how much that project is exposed to potential appeals, because there's already been a lot of opportunity for engagement on the front side.
Another example of this type of community engagement we're seeing right now is in Plainfield with the Village Expansion Project. They've done a very thorough community engagement process, and now what's going to happen next, we will see.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, so an example of like, how do we carry this work forward into work that's happening in the field, in the Land Use Review Board appeals working group, as this idea came forward kind of naturally as we were looking at appeals, one of the lawyers in the room said, well, actually, if affordable housing was zoned as a zoned use, then all you're getting is a building permit and there's very little to appeal there. So what if every town that had zoning said that affordable housing was a zoned use? Suddenly you're not having to go through DRB processes. And then somebody else said, is there a mechanism the state can put into place that says affordable housing is a de facto default zoned use in all parts of the state? So again, there is no municipal appeals process because there's no permitting process. So that's an example of like, how do we bring forward an idea and then leverage all of the places the conversation is happening, including in this committee room, to accelerate that. And then the third question is just really broad. What is the summer and fall work that you all think we can do together? You know, this committee with us or out in the field, all of the partners. What would you like to see us teeing up so that, again, next January, we've got some legislation that's ready to go? So with that, these are the prompts. And we'd love to take the next however much time to, of course, answer any questions, but this is really discussion time. Ornella's taking notes so that we're gonna hold us all to this. We're gonna hold us to the good ideas that come forward here.
Could
Does
you,
that feel clear? Yes, please.
could you go back to
Yeah,
the recommendations?
absolutely, yeah.
Here. Maybe, I think, personally, I think this is a good list of primary issues. Maybe, I don't know, it might help a little if I would just comment on the status of where I think things are with these and thoughts on summer activity.
Yes, please.
I think the first one, subsidizing affordable homes, is obviously the idea of a stable funding source. It's really important. The problem is we haven't identified one, and we would appreciate very specific recommendations as to what they might be. The problem with, I mean, I think we all get here the problem with the normal process. We watched we had a recommendation which was already low for VHCV, and what they got 25% of it, 20% of it. But we haven't identified such a thing, and if anybody comes up with a brilliant idea, we'd like to know what it is. For example, last year, there was a consideration of a 1% of a surcharge in income on the top 1%, and it just never went anywhere. So, I mean, it was supposed to pay for education and public safety, et cetera, and it just, with all of that impetus, just didn't go anywhere. So I think I guess there's an appetite for realistic options that might make it through the assembly. I think the tier 1B default opt out rather than opt in is one I would like to know more about, and I have questions about here. But I can say that's an example where engagement with the Environment Committee is important. You wrote us saying, hey, could we make a presentation to you? I think it was Maura who actually wrote us, and I think you could do that with the Environment Committee. I will say a lot of the testimony that we had on why housing is needed and why we're not making it and why subsidy is essential. We've had all that testimony, and I don't think the Environment Committee it has. And I think that it's essential that they do. The Act 250 Tier 1 inclusionary zoning, you're talking about technical assistance. I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't have much comment on that. Expediting appeals, I think the key is people are talking about those issues all the time. We had one approach to a modest part of that, which is getting through the door, standing. And as you know, that's very controversial as it is. But yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities. Right now in Vermont, and there's people talking about it. And I think that the biggest concern I have is that the Land Use Review Board process will end up with a report and no recommendation. So I think that getting them to focus down to recommendations is probably essential, and not necessarily an easy thing. But yes, people are talking about all kinds of things already, such as changing the standard of review so that it's not de novo. Changing the whole planning process so that you sort of alluded to this, Jean. People are talking about, I've had conversations with a lot of people about changing the whole process and essentially putting all the environmental review up at the plan level so that when you get down to the permit level, it's just a building permit. But that means taking wetlands, and all kinds of state permits and making the people who do them at the plan level and let go at the plan. And there's just no way that's going to happen without engagement with the executive branch. And so I would say that kind of engagement is essential. Without BHFA and BHCB and others really engaging with ANR and coming up with ways to make all of this review happen at the plan level, it just won't happen. It needs that. I think, in other words, I don't think we could just do a piece of legislation here. It just wouldn't be worth it. It's not like we don't know what to do. It's convincing all the actors to do that. I think that is a summer project by itself. I mean, I know without having been involved in it, I wasn't. Act 181 was the result of, I'd say almost a year of engagement to get to 181. And I think we could get to, I mean, right now we have a problem that you have a group of people who just want to get rid of all regulation or get rid of Act 250 or as much as they can. That's not going to happen. And so, on the other hand, I think it's perfectly possible to find ways by elevating everything to the plan level. It's perfectly possible for people to have their cake and eat it too.
Can I ask a question?
No,
When
please.
you say elevate everything to the plan level, you mean close the door past the planning?
Yeah, I would say, as Jean alluded to, that if you make the decision at the community level, you say to a community, you get to decide where you put your housing. But once you decide that and you plan it all, then the state does all its permitting at the plan level. And after that, it's just building permit.
And specifically for affordable housing.
Yeah, right. I think that, and that there'd be open to definition as to what that is.
Yep.
Brownfields, I don't have anything to say more than we got Brownfields to say they would do a report. But the report's due November 1 on how they could make it faster and easier. The tax rate impacts also, it's in the ed bill there. So I think some of this is underway and some of it needs a lot of work.
Thank you. And yes, that's exactly the point. Hopefully, all of this is in some way underway, and how can we pull together on it? I'd love to follow up on one thing you said, which is how do we come up with realistic suggestions on a stable funding stream?
Right.
Because I'd love some feedback from this whole circle here, this whole committee. What do you think? I mean, one, do you think there is a pathway to creating a new revenue stream to really address this housing crisis we're in? And two, what do you think are starting points for realistic suggestions or like no-go zones so that we don't waste time trying to put together a plan that is just never going to go anywhere?
I wonder whether that wouldn't necessarily be a steady stream of income, nor stable or new.
It's okay. Oh, also, what I didn't say, these don't have to be perfect ideas. The whole point of us doing this together is half-baked, is like, if you're half-baked and my half-baked, we get closer to full bit.
I wonder, so there are bills in both the House and Senate this session from both of their, is that the right time? Well,
Yeah.
there are bills in both the House and Senate for both of their corrections and institutions committees that look at a process through which the state can unload properties that they want to sell. I wonder whether, because whether there could be a portion of the sale of those properties that are dedicated to, it seems to me to be that there is a valid link there between public good.
Reflect back what you heard.
Yeah, I heard that a potential revenue stream is what's being explored in terms of state-owned property that is is being looked at to be sold. And when those property transactions come in, could that be a revenue stream that's dedicated towards affordable housing?
Yeah, for example, I am constantly thinking about the Windsor Prison lands. And of course, I'm also thinking that for the LAOB, that like that property fits so many of your needs. It would make a beautiful project property for you, but also if they were to sell it to an individual or an organization, it's depending on which they sold it to and how they decided to do it. And whether they use the gains to offset some of the money that they've already sunk into the property by owning it, or what, but they are both of those bills asked to have that studied over the summer, so it might be a good idea to try to elbow your way in there too.
Anyone else have thoughts on revenue, how we could create some revenue, or also like places we should not even look because you'll always say no to it?
Yes. Tell us all the ways you'll say no, so we know.
Yes,
They don't say no, the other.
Just up on your idea, isn't that the study for the land bank?
the land bank is a study is supposed to provide funding for the land bank.
Respectfully.
I was talking about, I know that in they're both corrections and institutions bills, not housing bills, so.
Yeah.
They both consider how to offload properties like the Windsor Prison lands.
Right.
And create, they ask for a process on how to replicate that
That
with each
could,
sale.
that could be, well, first of all, of course, the tax sales don't pull off during tax sales of land, that is people not paying their taxes doesn't yield.
That's separate.
because- Yeah, it doesn't yield much because the price is very low, but yeah, state-owned land, if it's sold, can be a source of revenue, or if you're gonna build housing on it, they can write down the value of the land to $0 or $1, and that subsidizes housing.
That's exactly my point, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be income per se.
Yeah.
That it could, and also another thing is depending on what we do with the land bank. Or what we do with changing tax sale laws, we could change it to requiring that any tax sale gotten through this means, or not necessarily, a tax sale gotten through this means and by this mechanism, the end has to be something, a use that's for the public good.
Others? I think that, frankly, it is a puzzle. My own feeling is, our experience so far with the income tax is that there's too many claims on it. It just won't go anywhere. Also, there's enough concern, which, there's this whole debate, if you tax them 1%, will they leave? And I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that they might, that we have high taxes on the high end. There's a lot of studies that they won't. But I don't see resolving that in the near future, that there's studies that look at other states that have millionaire taxes or whatever they call them. And the argument is that that's not why people choose where they live. It's just not a factor. But I am worried that there's a resistance to any increase, even on the upper, but not 1%. And that there's, even if it happened, so many competing claims on it. I think it would have to be something new, and I don't know what that is. We have not been able to identify that. I'm wondering whether something useful, if you guys wanted to work on, would be to work with various think tanks that look at they look at other states and what they're doing and see whether there's any income source that we might have missed. I mean, we're not staffed. Well, we are, of course, but it's hard for us to, we are state.
You're leaving it.
Yeah, you're gone. It's hard for us to do that. Yeah,
If I could just reflect back that VHFA is a part of a national organization
Yeah.
of all the state housing
Yeah.
agencies, so I am paying attention to where everyone else is getting their money from.
Yeah.
And I want to credit Vermont as the fact that right now, most states are coming up with this brand new idea of having a state housing tax credit. And they are like, it worked on the federal level, we should have a state one. And so my phone is ringing off the hook because we've had
You
one
have
since
one,
the
yeah.
year 2000.
Yeah.
And so we have a 25-year history with it as they're standing it up. And I could bore you with all the ways ours is better and more flexible and responsive. And what they're setting up actually is not as good as ours. And we get a higher bang for the buck. The dollar that the state is foregoing is bringing in more money for housing than how the other states are setting it up. I think other states are just learning about the equivalent of a property transfer tax revenue, all that. Some of the issue is scale. And I think we have the programs, we have the things, they're just not meeting the need. So it's not about a new source sometimes, I don't want to preclude that. I'm just saying like, we're doing pretty well, we just need more tax credits, more PTT, more taxes, more all the things.
which is, it sounds like what you're saying is that looking at what other states might yield is not going to be a particularly productive activity because you already think we're ahead of them.
I don't want to say that there's not other good ideas that come about all the time or other ones, but I think what we're talking about is the scale of the investments.
I know we're out of time. So I'd love to hear from anyone who hasn't talked today. That's a common practice that we pursue. If there are something burbling that is not fully formed, but there's a little voice inside you that says, I should say this now.
Members of the committee? Despite the fact of having spoken too much myself, I just want to clarify one thing. Tier 1B, opt in versus, opt out. Okay, first of all, as I understand it, Tier 1B is in the process of a mapping process. But in the meantime, there is sort of there are exemptions that are effective now, right?
Yes.
So is your thought that, let's say we didn't, would we want the opt out as opposed to opt in as part of the future when it's all mapped, or as part of the now under the exemption?
My understanding is that the RPCs are currently making their future land use maps with everybody's should be done, I think, by next January or something. And that those will include the tier 1A and tier 1B, and that through the RPC planning process, they are recommending where they think tier 1 should be, but then municipalities have to go through a process of opting into that. What we propose from this report is, let's put the default scenario into and it is tier 1, and then they can opt out if they have some kind of extraordinary concerns about this.
And that was in 181 last year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. Did 181?
I would say that there are a few people in this building, two in particular, that didn't like it and took it out and made that change.
Right. I think that the two thoughts I have are that we might pursue are this, or that you might pursue, and I guess we would be involved. One is to get to, if a town has to do certain things to be eligible for 1B, like planning, zoning, etc., and doesn't have them. How would opt out work? If you're in, wouldn't it be the same if you opt out, you still have to do all that stuff.
My understanding is they would not be eligible for tier one if they don't have planning and zoning already.
But if they,
Would not have anything to opt in or out of, they're just not eligible.
I know, well, think about whether that makes sense, because towns that don't want to be in just wouldn't do the planning and zoning.
Got it, I see what you're saying.
Okay,
But they could just opt out. They could opt out.
yeah, but they don't have to opt out, they just don't perform the planning and zoning, and then they're not in.
Saying it would disincentivize planning.
Well, I wonder, I just don't know enough, but I think it's getting down to that level of, getting down to that level of granularity would help. And I think the other is, it was just alluded to by our vice chair. There's very specific objections to that. And they were articulated, and I think we have to address those
Can you
objections.
articulate them in a nutshell?
No, I don't know them, I just know,
I'd happily offer to put it in our housing bill right now.
I mean,
I second that.
there we go. There are definitely some, but I'd like to,
But we won't.
I want to, well, we could next year. I think we should do it, but I'm totally supportive of it. I just think we, have to understand with some granularity what it is. And B, we have to anticipate that we have the advantage of having seen it defeated before. So we know what people were arguing, and I'd like to think through what's the responses to those arguments. Is there anything that can be done directly about them before we just go splat up against the same problem? I think we wait for the brownfields review. I think we wait. I think we see what happens with the education bill. Yeah, I think, you're participating in the LURB study, right?
On appeals and tier three and wood products manufacturing. And hopefully the tier two when that gets launched. But we need help. So don't say like, oh, that study is happening and you're participating and it's all good, because the study process is only as good as the people who created it and participate. And honestly, Act 250 is a mind swirl. We really need like people to be all hands on here, and we really encourage you to reach out to us in the coming months to tell us what your constituents are looking for. What are your good ideas? What are your half-baked ideas? Like this is how we do our work, is through discourse and coming up with better ideas together than we can do alone.
Can I see what your other two prompts were?
Oh, yeah, sorry. They were, whoops. And this second one of like what's currently underway, you're pointing out those working groups with the LURB. I mean, we're in there right now with Act 250, 3 hours a week on different study groups, you know, for the future, like I've seen the known future, we're 3 hours a week in there. It would be great to be pushing these kinds of policies in those working groups. But again, we need some help being strategic on how to do that. Where else are there conversations that are happening that have teeth that we could be working together to make sure that we're not just having the same level of idea, but we're actually getting more granular each time we have the thought and work it through another group of people. So we're not gonna solve it today, but.
We're not.
I don't think so. I would love it if we could, and we could all retire and go garden also.
Welcome to our world.
I want garden.
Does any member of the committee have any other questions or thoughts at this point? I think that we have the same tensions here. I mean, this committee is, one of the interesting and good things about this committee is it represents pretty much all the different types of geography in the state, from Burlington to Chester. Yeah, beyond. And I think there's feelings like we really want to promote housing. There's also feelings that we want to fix it so that towns that want to plan and make housing happen can do it without a rigmarole in the process that's so burdensome that and I think we want RPCs to be able to help them without for telling them what they have to do. There's that kind of stuff. So there are all the tensions to. But I guess what I'm saying is those half dozen points, I think they're all underway in one way or another. And I think you're right, getting granular and also thinking about the divided responsibilities in this building.
Thank you. I really did, like, one of my favorite suggestions today is let's bring this report to the environmental committees. And that is really, if I can speak candidly about my new experiences with Act 250 and those working groups, it is challenging because it feels like we're stepping into a conversation that the environmental community has been having with the housing, like there's sort of these two camps broadly, and now those same camps are present in this rulemaking. There's not really been effort to rationalize what are our shared values or what's the goal of Act 250. I'm still at well, what has Act 250 achieved? Do we have any data on that? Do we really understand what this land use regulation has done? And for me, again, as someone who's new to Act 250 and this conversation, I'm lacking for that baseline information and that analysis. And I feel like I'm jumping into a conversation that two different camps have been having with each other for 50 years. And I'm not sure that it's really different now that we have a land use review board. I'm interested to see how can we use this new tool of the land use review board to carry that conversation forward, not just have it in different formats. And so I really like the idea of all of us taking this little roadshow to the environmental committees and saying, hey, we think you care about housing too. How can we work together with your values to also promote?
I think, though, that when you and if you can testify there, I think you have to go back a step from this report. And I think Maura's show about what's happening, why we need housing, is an important part of that. I wouldn't just start here, because this assumes that we all know that we need housing. I wouldn't assume that. I wouldn't assume. We know from all the testimony we've had a lot of testimony here from small and large developers, for-profit, nonprofits. And so we know here that by and large, with certain exceptions, it costs a lot more to produce a housing unit than anyone who's even middle class can afford. We know that. I'm not sure that others know that because we've had the testimony. We didn't know that. We didn't know it cost $600,000 to produce a housing unit before tariffs. So I think stepping back. And the other thing is, I wouldn't assume that the traditional environmentalist versus home builder divide is really necessarily that relevant anymore. I think there's a lot of consensus in that group. Like, for example, when we proposed tightening up the appeals process, the NRC was with us. I mean, they also think the study is important, but they're basically with us. I think that more likely a harder nut to crack is urban versus rural. And most of Vermont's rural. And that's a very, very real issue that plays itself out all the time. It's playing itself out now in our housing market. So those are my thoughts. We have several very specific tasks for this summer and fall. We would like to be in a position to be discussing legislation around common interest subdivisions, around the whole issue that Elizabeth was raising of dilapidated and abandoned houses. And then the study of how to fund and what it would look like, the land banks, or sort of goes into that. And mobile homes. which now they're not that cheap. But there's a certain amount in our bill, but we know there's more. So I think that the issue of appeals, there's a small cast of characters who are working on that and will be participating in the process. But I don't know that we don't have we know that next session, we moved the LURB study up from January to mid-November, precisely so that we would have time to integrate it. And I think that if there's anything we can do that you think we can do to help make that process fruitful, we'd like to know it. Both Allison and I, are available. So, other comments? Thoughts? You want from us, guys? Anything you want from us that we're not? Money.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'd like that too.
He's gonna ask. I mean, that was your fault.
Jean,
can you
share the slide?
I'll remind me first.
At this point, we do not have anything after the floor. So there's nothing after the floor. We do have scheduled for 9 o'clock, right? 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, John is gonna walk us through the amendment that I sent you all. And we'll, if we can, have a straw vote on that then. And the bill, our housing bill is scheduled it's on notice today. And so unless there's a desire to delay it, I don't know yet, it would be on the floor on tomorrow afternoon. And I'll be doing the report.
That's the third reading Friday.
And then third, well, yeah, maybe. I hope so. Okay, great. I think, any last thing?